deserve to know that the food they buy for their families is safe to eat. One place to start should be examining FDA's review process to ensure the safety of ingredients that go into foods. I know Dr. Makary is passionate about this issue. I look forward to working with him if he is confirmed. The American people's trust in our public health and science agencies and the products they regulate must be restored. Rebuilding public confidence in medical products like vaccines is especially important as we respond to measles outbreaks and as FDA considers recommendations for vaccines for flu strains ahead of the upcoming flu season. Dr. Makary, with his experience as a surgeon and an effective health policy communicator, can help our public health agencies rebuild trust with the American people. Thank you for appearing before the committee and discussing your vision on how to make America healthy again. Senator Sanders is not here, so Dr. Makary will go to you for your opening statement.
Great. Thank you, Senator Dr. Cassidy and Ranking Member Sanders and members of the committee. I'm humbled to be before you here. I'd like to thank President Trump for his confidence in nominating me to lead the Food and Drug Administration. I'm joined today by my wife, Jessica, my sister, Maria, my brother, Mark, Nora Jacoby, Alexander Jacoby, and my very sacrificial mother, and my career role model, my father. My father dedicated his life to the care of children with leukemia, lymphoma, hemophilia, sickle cell disease, and then turned his attention to adult hematology. His father, my grandfather, was a pharmacist in a poor Egyptian community and believed in treating everybody equally, especially the most vulnerable among them, a philosophy I've tried to emulate in my career and research. Even from the African continent, my grandfather looked to the US FDA for trusted guidance. That's because the FDA has a long history of using gold standard science to uphold public safety and help us, as clinicians, take care of patients when they come to us for help. As a kid, I vividly remember being in the grocery store in our small town with my dad when somebody would stop him, break out in tears, and give him a long hug after what I would learn to be a decades-long battle with lymphoma. It happened a few times, and each time it inspired me even more. For 22 years now, I've had the privilege to walk into the Johns Hopkins Hospital to live out that mission. And each morning as I enter the front door, I pause and look at the 9-foot statue of Jesus that stands in the center of the hospital lobby. And I read the sacred text engraved at the base. "Come to me, all ye who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." I'm grateful to Johns Hopkins for allowing me to have a creative career, a dual career, as both a surgical oncologist and a healthcare public policy researcher. In addition to using FDA-approved devices and medications, my research, which has now spanned over 300 scientific peer-reviewed articles in the medical literature, has focused on what's actually making a difference in helping people, and how healthcare has become too fragmented, too cold, and too corporate. My research and subsequent book on price gouging and predatory billing in healthcare turned into advocacy to demand more transparency in healthcare. President Trump heard the plea and invited me to the White House in his first administration to enact the nation's first executive order to bring down hospital and drug prices through greater transparency. The reform was entirely bipartisan, just as President Trump and Secretary Kennedy's call to make America healthy again by finally addressing the root causes of our child chronic disease epidemic, a message that's resonated with moms across the country regardless of their politics. A smarter FDA that works for all Americans should be a goal we can all agree on. As a scientist who has spent a career evaluating medical interventions, I believe in the scientific process. In addition, I also believe that we can use common sense. Dr. Cassidy, as I have been in the operating room, as you would relate as a respected hematologist, it's hard to perform a long, sophisticated operation for liver cancer and not ask why our rates of liver cancer tripled in the United States. We now have a generational opportunity in American healthcare. President Trump and Secretary Kennedy's focus on healthy foods has galvanized a grassroots movement in America. Childhood obesity is not a willpower problem, and the rise of early onset Alzheimer's is not a genetic cause. We should be, and we will be, addressing food as it impacts our health. Thanks to the courage of President Trump and Secretary Kennedy, we now have a generational opportunity to usher in radical transparency to facilitate more cures, meaningful treatments, and diagnostics at the FDA to help people take care of their own health. My father told me to write down my observations and my experiences in healthcare and the research I delved into. Much of the research I did focused on the fundamental question, is what we are doing working? I wrote books to educate the public on medical science and to empower them to live healthier lives. If confirmed, I hope to ensure the FDA holds to the gold standard of trusted science, transparency, and common sense to rebuild public trust and make America healthy again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Makary. I'll start with questions. In 2021, a few months after President Biden took office, FDA announced it would no longer enforce the in-person dispensing requirement for mifepristone, the drug which obviously is an abortifacient. Now, this is concerning to me. There is a case out of Louisiana which is incredibly egregious, in which there was no recognition that the person requesting the drug was not the patient, but rather someone who was going to allegedly coerce the person into taking the medication, which would have been evident to a physician should she or he have seen the patient. So if confirmed, would you reinstate the in-person dispensing requirement as well as reporting requirements for adverse events and other complications associated with the drug?
Thank you, Senator. And to hear of someone being coerced to take mifepristone is deeply disturbing, and I might even suggest criminal. I have no preconceived plans on mifepristone policy except to take a solid, hard look at the data and to meet with the professional career scientists who have reviewed the data at the FDA and to build an expert coalition to review the ongoing data, which is required to be collected as a part of the REMS program, the Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Strategy. It is pursuant to the REMS, and so if we're going to collect data, I believe we should look at it.
Last week, the FDA announced it would cancel its annual Vaccines and Related Biologic Products Advisory Committee, which meets to select anticipated virus strains for next year's flu vaccines. Now, I'm told by people who are familiar that the FDA will make the recommendation and that they will come up with the right decision. But they also say what is lost is the transparency, because the open meeting allows a postmortem, if you will, as we say in medicine, a review of last year, what went right, what went wrong, and how to make it better. I think one of the laudable things about Secretary Kennedy's positions is he wants more transparency in terms of how the federal government makes medical decisions as part of restoring that faith. And so, frankly, this seems to go backwards on that. So how will you ensure that advisory committees remain objective, transparent, and still benefiting from the necessary expertise of external experts?
Senator, thank you for the question, and I was not involved in that decision. Certainly, if confirmed once in office, you have my commitment to take a look at it. As you know, that VRPAC committee takes a look at guidance and recommendations from international groups, such as the GIP International Consortium. My understanding is, at least for the last 7 or 8 years that I've been following that group, we have simply rubber-stamped whatever the international GIP group has.
Can I stop you for a second? My understanding, though, since these strains typically begin, like in Australia or China. It isn't so much as a rubber stamp, but as much as recognizing what are you seeing, because that's what's coming to us. So just to, I think it's more than quibbling to say that you're learning from them. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so the American public deserves confidence that scientists are looking at that data from the Southern Hemisphere. It's all reported into a registry, all the dominant strains, and then picking the most dominant strains that are lighting up in that registry is that process of really trying to estimate which strain is going to be dominant in the United States. It's not very precise. Some years we don't get it very well, but it's the best we can do with the data we have available at the time. So the group, for example, the International GIP group chose to no longer include the influenza B strains a couple years ago. Sounded like a very reasonable decision, and VRBPAC also went along with that recommendation. But I think we're aligned in that the American public want to have some confidence that independent scientists are looking at these data.
And going back to the transparency, again, it seems what's lost with the open meeting is the transparency. So how, as you FDA, how can you, as FDA commissioner, advocate for that transparency? Because we want the American people to know, and obviously canceling the meeting will kind of shut that door a little bit.
Yeah. So, Senator, I was not involved in that decision, but
I accept that. And again, yeah. but we're voting for you. So how are you going to make it happen? I guess that's my question.
So you have my commitment to review what the committees are doing, how they're being used. As you know, I was critical when that committee was not convened at all during one of the COVID booster guidance decisions by the FDA, and the FDA career and leadership at the time argued that they're advisory and we don't have to convene them. That was repeatedly throughout the Biden administration, and there may be some value if there's a step where the efficiencies can be made, but I think with something that's important, something that's critical, something where we want expert opinion, it not only provides some of that wisdom, but it also increases the perception of confidence from the general public, which is what
Senator Murray.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here today. Let me follow up on that, because last week I sent you a letter along with some of my colleagues asking you about the FDA's cancellation of that Vaccine Advisory Committee meeting. For everybody's information, this is a meeting that takes place annually for at least 30 years to make recommendations on which influenza strains should be included in the flu vaccines for the upcoming flu season. And for the first time in decades, FDA canceled that meeting with no explanation given, no new date chosen. That is, I believe, unprecedented and dangerous. And you just referred to it, Dr. Makary. In 2022, you raised concerns when the FDA was considering not holding a vaccine committee meeting to authorize COVID-19 boosters for kids 12 to 15. And at the time, you said it was, quote, unconscionable and undermined the integrity of the FDA's standard process to not hold that committee meeting. So if you are confirmed, will you commit to immediately reschedule that FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee meeting to get the expert views? We need to know those so we can have the correct vaccine for the upcoming flu season.
Thank you, Senator, for the question, and I appreciated our time together in meeting ahead of this hearing. I was not involved in that decision, and what I would say is
you will immediately reconvene it.
I will immediately reevaluate which sessions, the leadership of that center, which decisions, which topics could benefit from.
What goes into a reevaluation? This is done every year, so we know what flu vaccine to have. What are you reevaluating?
First of all, for the last 7 or 8 years that I've been following it, they simply adopt verbatim the recommendation of the International GIP group. But I was not involved in that decision. I will say that there, in my opinion, was a huge difference between requiring every 12-year-old girl in America to take an 8th COVID booster shot versus rubber stamping a recommendation from the International GIP group, which has done 7 out of the last 7 years. I'm not saying that the decision is something I was aware of or involved in, but it's certainly something I will look at if confirmed.
Okay, I'm very unclear because the FDA is the gold standard for all of us. And this committee hearing is what has always been what we look to, the FDA look to, the American people look to determine what the flu vaccine is. What are you going to look at to make a determination and figure something else out now, decades into this? What are you re-looking at?
Senator, I was not involved in that decision,
I
but the
understand
committee
that, but
looks
I
at,
assumed you would say, yes, I will reconfirm it immediately so we can let our public health experts and doctors know what flu to have next fall.
as I understand it, the committee members and the scientists at the FDA, the career professional scientists at the FDA, look at the recommendation of the
What they do,
International
I'm
GIP
asking-
group,
I'm just
and they
asking
say,
you-
okay,
You just told me that you were going to reevaluate it, and I want to know what you are reevaluating it on. What are you looking at to make a decision, whether to reconvene it?
in conjunction with the center director of the Biologics Center, I would reevaluate which topics deserve a convening of the advisory committee members on VRPAC and which may not require a convening.
So
Obviously,
what would we base our
during,
decision on?
well, you can ask the Biden administration that chose not to convene the committee meeting for the COVID
Which you
vaccine
condemned.
booster.
I get that, I understand. But I'm asking you, how will we know what flu to take next year, vaccine, if this committee doesn't reconvene and make their recommendation?
Senator, I was not involved in that decision not to convene that group.
I thought you would say, yes, we're going to reconvene so everyone knows what's coming. Let me just ask you really quick, also following up on a question on mifepristone, because FDA does play a really critical role in making sure we have safe and effective medications. Contraception and medication abortion have been approved by the FDA for many, many decades based on mountains of high-quality evidence and expert scientific judgment. So if you are confirmed, will you commit to upholding the science and evidence-based drug approvals for all FDA-approved products, including contraception and medication abortion?
Thank you for the question, Senator Murray. You have my commitment to follow the independent scientific review process at the FDA, which is a tried and true process and that has been around. And so that is my commitment to you, Senator.
Okay, well, I want to be clear. There have been over 100 high-quality studies over more than 2 decades backing up the science and safety of mifepristone. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Paul.
Congratulations, Dr. Makary, on your nomination. And I think one of the most important things we need in government are people who are open-minded. I think closed-mindedness, the idea that this is settled and no one will ever, if you see data as the FDA and you have to make a decision, are you willing to lead where the data and the facts take you as opposed to your preconceptions?
Absolutely, Senator Paul. I think it is part of being a scientist. We need more humility in the medical establishment. You have to be willing to evolve your position as new data comes in.
The people who aren't involved in science think that, there's settled science and this is, it's just all settled and we should just all be quiet and submit to whatever settled science is. But you mentioned to me on the way in that yesterday you removed a gallbladder through the laparoscope. I was in medical school and surgical training, about the time where everybody made a 4 or 5 inch V incision to take the gallbladder out. And the older surgeons, the consensus, they ran the surgery departments. They were like, it's malpractice to use these tiny incisions and blow the air into the abdomen and do all this. But it took an overcoming of the consensus. Do you remember some of that? It might have been a little after your time, but you remember some of the transition from the larger incision to the small incision and the resistance of the consensus?
Oh, yeah, Senator. I can tell you some of the surgeons who trained me said things like, big surgeons use big incisions, and the bigger the incision, the better. And, without having a big open incision, you can't really see what you're doing. And I would point out that a laparoscope gives you 10 times the magnification. But there's a lot of medical dogma that has contaminated our field, and I think it's tied to a lack of humility. Ultimately, what makes a great doctor, in my opinion, as I teach my residents, is not how much you know, it's your humility and your willingness to learn as you go from patients.
I think some people here also are not duly impressed enough by what it takes to do the kind of surgery that you do. Now, I'm an ophthalmologist, and I do eye surgery, and we do really tiny incisions. But our surgery lasts between 5 and 20 minutes a lot of times to take the cataract. How long does it take to do it? You've done Whipple's, I imagine, which is a surgery on the liver. How long does a Whipple surgery take? What's that? I thought you did Whipple's too.
So Whipple's, yeah, I've
On
done a
liver.
lot of Whipple operations and islet transplant procedures, and then pioneered a new type of procedure, which is a laparoscopic pancreas islet transplantation, with hopes that it can someday be used to cure diabetes. It was about 8 hours for that operation when we started. We've gotten it down to about 4 or 5 hours, and we've done some laparoscopic Whipples in 3 hours.
With regard to the vaccine committees, and they talk about whether they meet or they don't meet and things, and there have been some questions, and one of the questions that I've been bringing forward is whether or not there could be a conflict of interest. And one of the things I've asked, and you would think it would be universally accepted by everyone without question, is you should have to reveal if you get royalties from drug companies. So if you're making a decision on a Pfizer vaccine or a Moderna vaccine, I would think the least of transparency should be that you reveal, if you get royalties from those companies. Do you think we need to evaluate the people on the committees or see whether they get royalties or see whether or not there are conflict of interest for the people making these decisions?
Yes, I do, Senator. We need to review the ethics policy because people see things that appear to be a cozy relationship between industry and the regulators that are supposed to be regulating the products. Now, I want American companies to thrive. I want life sciences companies to thrive, but we need to call balls and strikes and to keep that independent scientific review process free of any conflicts. So I do think it deserves a look.
And really, I think it would be an area that a lot of people, once again, think there's a consensus. You either take all the COVID vaccines or not. Most of Europe doesn't recommend a COVID vaccine for under age 12. Almost all the countries don't recommend it for under 12, some under 18. And it's because they've looked at the risk-benefit for children of the vaccine and some of the possible complications of it. And it's different, frankly, for older people. And it's like, these are things that we should at least discuss and evaluate. Some of the most pro-vaccine people, when the policy came out to give boosters to your 6-month-old, said they wouldn't even give it to their 24-year-old a booster. Remember one of the famous committee members. 2 committee members left the vaccine committee because the CDC under Biden politicized the process and overrode the vaccine committee. So to insinuate that somehow there's some brand new thing going on, these are longstanding controversies. And I think that the main thing I'll go back to is in the beginning, we need open-mindedness, and I appreciate your willingness to look at the facts, the data, and not be overwhelmed by preconceptions.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thought you were saying
Welcome,
Whipple was
Thank you.
Dr. Makary.
No, we're saying Whipple. He's
I
done
want to go over a couple of topics that have already been raised, and if we have time, explore one that has not yet. But I want to understand your position on mifepristone, because we had an opportunity to speak in my office, and I thought that you were pretty clear with me during that meeting that you were aware of the overwhelming scientific conclusion about the safety of this medication and that you did not think politics should be involved in decisions moving forward. And I understood from our conversation that you intended to stand behind the FDA's longstanding determination. But after our meeting, I don't know if it was you or your minders, but they followed up with my staff and said they felt that you misunderstood my question and wanted to clarify your answer, which by my read implied that you are open to totally re-examining the scientific determination, even with decades of evidence. So I want to clearly understand your position. As FDA Commissioner, will you maintain current access to mifepristone, yes or no?
Senator, I'll be very clear about my position. My position is that of a scientist. As you know, part of the REMS, the Risk Evaluation Mitigation Strategy, that was put in initially by President Clinton in that administration, and then modified under Obama, and then again under President Biden, requires ongoing data collection. So I can't prejudge that data without looking at it.
So you said something about convening an ongoing panel
I did not mention.
to a previous question just asked.
I did not mention a panel. I said I would convene the scientists. They're professional career scientists at the FDA who have reviewed the totality of data on this and are also looking at ongoing data that is being collected. There could be, for example, Senator, a drug-drug interaction that may show up on the ongoing data.
So I want to ask if that's your approach to something that has been approved for now decades, are you going to do the same with Tylenol? There are a lot of side effects for daily use, including liver damage. Will you be doing that for Tylenol?
As you may know, Senator, Tylenol does not have a regulation requiring a REMS, a risk evaluation
I'm
mitigation.
not asking whether it does or not. I'm asking, are you going to do ongoing surveillance of the possible side effects for that drug that was approved many years ago? How about asthma inhalers that have been associated with osteoporosis, opportunistic lung infections? Are you going to be doing that for those medications?
Senator, I will be following the law, and the regulation requires an ongoing review.
You're going to have a totally different approach to this. I want to get to the, again, a little bit more about what we're talking about with the influenza vaccine and vaccines in general. As has been said in this hearing, the advisory committee annual meeting was canceled for selection of what strain of influenza our vaccines for this next season would confront. There have been additional reports that Secretary Kennedy wants to make significant changes to another advisory committee that makes recommendation and provides advice to vaccines, for vaccines. And I worry that this is merely a ploy to install vaccine skeptics on these critical panels. Our advisory committees must maintain scientific integrity and should not be changed for political purposes or to further an agenda. So, Dr. Makary, do you intend to remove experts from the Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee?
Senator, first of all, I'm not familiar with what you're referring to regarding Secretary Kennedy. Secretary Kennedy wants to make America healthy again. With regard to the vaccine VRBPAC committee deciding on which flu strain to identify, I was not involved in that decision, but again, just as a reminder—
Are you planning, if confirmed, to remove any experts from the Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee?
I have no preconceived plans to rearrange that committee or any committee. I will say on influenza—
Do you commit to maintaining scientific integrity on advisory committees and receiving regular outside expertise if confirmed?
Of course.
Okay.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Doctor, I appreciate your willingness to serve and was impressed as a result of our conversation in my office. Let me ask you, you've had a lot of questions about the Vaccine Advisory Committee. Let me just ask you a simple, straightforward question, and that is, if you are confirmed, will you reinstate meetings of the committee?
The VRBPAC committee will be meeting if confirmed, and I'm commissioner, yes.
Thank you. In February, we learned that hundreds of probationary employees at FDA were dismissed. And this really concerns me because we need a flow of young new scientists and researchers, especially since we're seeing retirements and resignations. And ironically, more than half of the FDA employees are funded under various industry user fee agreements. So there is revenue coming into the FDA to pay for these employees. If confirmed, will you, not an outside force, but you, have full authority over FDA staffing decisions?
Senator, if confirmed as commissioner, you have my commitment that I will do an assessment of the staffing and personnel at the agency. I have not been involved in any of the decisions regarding any of the personnel changes recently, but if confirmed, you have my commitment that I will do an assessment.
I just want to make sure that you're the one doing that assessment. I'm not saying that the staffing level is perfect, and I think it's helpful for a new commissioner to do an assessment, but I want that person to do it. And it sounds like you are committing to that. Is that correct?
I will do an assessment. I commit to that. Yes, Senator.
One of the best ways to lower the cost of prescription drugs is by promoting more market competition. And one way that we can do this is by making it easier for generic and biosimilar drugs to come to the market. As part of a broader bill that Senator Shaheen and I have introduced to help lower the cost of insulin, we've included a provision to create a new competitive biosimilar pathway and therapy designation at FDA, under which eligible products for which there is inadequate biosimilar competition now could achieve expedited review. I worked with the FDA in the last Congress to develop this provision, and I look forward to continuing to push this concept so that it becomes law. Do you support the concept of a new expedited pathway for biosimilars to compete, for example, with branded insulin?
First of all, Senator, you've taken a strong interest in the FDA, and I very much appreciate it, and I really enjoyed our time together. I've learned from you, and thank you for your leadership on the Diabetes Caucus. It's something, of course, very close to my area of medicine. I am a big believer that we need to figure out a way to get biosimilars approved quicker without cutting corners on the scientific review. And it is one of several strategies that the FDA can do to try to alleviate the problems of high drug prices, inadequate competition or underperformance of competition, and the drug shortage in the United States. Also, other strategies could include the way we look at generic drugs, moving medications to over-the-counter. Does naloxone really need to be a prescription-only medication? Does an EpiPen need to be prescription-only? If they can be over-the-counter and we can feel confident about public safety when with those products on the shelf at a pharmacy, it would force the companies to put a price on the shelf. And I do believe in price transparency. It will have an effect on the entire marketplace. So thank you, Senator.
Thank you. And let me just end by saying that I am delighted with your interest in islet cell therapy for individuals with type 1. There are clinical trials underway, and I think that is such an exciting development. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Senator.
Thank you, Senator Collins. And now Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, Doctor, and congratulations to you and your family on your nomination.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator.
President Trump has promised to help lower costs, but prescription drug prices are once again skyrocketing for Granite Staters and all Americans. In 2025, drug makers have increased the list prices of over 500 common medications. Dr. Makary, when we met, you and I discussed the importance of increasing generic drug competition. If confirmed, will you work with me to speed the approval of generic drugs at FDA to lower drug costs for patients?
Senator, first of all, I very much enjoyed our meeting together. The answer to your question is an emphatic yes, and I would add to that that I would love to work with Congress to address the way that patent law has enabled patent thickening, which makes it more difficult for biosimilars and even some generics to come to market because they got to navigate so many lawsuits and letter of the patent law.
Well, and this is something that Senator Paul and I have actually been working on, and we have a bill called the Increasing Transparency in Generic Drug Applications Act, which would allow the FDA to communicate more transparently with generic drug manufacturers in order to make more low-cost prescription drugs available for patients. So the bill would save taxpayers over $1 billion and has bipartisan, bicameral agreement. So I'm going to urge all my colleagues to look at it. I've enjoyed working with Senator Paul and his team on it. Dr. Makary, you and I also discussed mifepristone when we met, a medication that has been used for decades in abortion care and miscarriage care. Now, during our meeting, you mentioned you weren't familiar with the drug, and I followed up by providing you with decades of the safety data, and you said you're a data guy, you would review it. Have you reviewed the data, and do you agree that mifepristone is safe and effective?
Thank you, Senator, for sending me that homework to read, and I did read those articles, including and what I was referring to when I said I'm not familiar with it is I have, and I don't believe I said I was not familiar with it. What I said was I have not reviewed the totality of the data. I am very familiar with mifepristone, and I did review those studies, including 2 surveys of patients inquiring about telemedicine, a 2018 National Academy of Medicine review.
Right.
I'm a member of the National Academy of Medicine, but was not involved in that particular review, but I did review that document.
So I shared with you that study from the National Academies where scientists looked at, just so people know, over 100 studies of medication abortion and found that the literature is clear that mifepristone is safe and effective. And then, also we've had the discussion about the REMS process for mifepristone. In 2021, the FDA looked again based on a citizen petition asking them to review the safety of mifepristone. And I think, just so people get a sense, this is the report back from the FDA about their review and about their modification of the language in the REMS process. And their review, again, was that it is safe and effective. And I think what you're hearing from a lot of us as we ask you questions about this, and just, so the public can understand, there's lots and lots of data here that supports the safety and efficacy of mifepristone and supports its efficacy in its current, under current law and its safety. So I think the concern you're hearing is not about whether you will follow an ongoing REMS process with any medication and look at the most current data. That's what the scientific process is about. The concern is whether you are going to unilaterally overrule the data that currently exists for political purposes and for political reasons. And that's what we're looking for your reassurance on. You have told us you are an independent scientist. I believe that. You have a very distinguished career as a physician. But we need to know that when you say you're an independent scientist, that's really what you mean. And then when the politics get heated around abortion, that you won't abandon that independence.
Senator, you have my commitment that once I'm in office, I will do a review of the data. I have no preconceived plans to make changes to the mifepristone policy, and I do plan to follow the law and the regulation of the REMS to look at ongoing data. It could be that there could be a drug-drug interaction that we could identify.
I understand that, but what I am looking for is an understanding that the current state of science in the process that you have been a participant in throughout your entire career and that others up here have also participated in, that you will follow the science as it is currently developed and not unilaterally overrule scientists because you're under political pressure to do that.
Senator, if you look at my track record, I have never been afraid to speak my honest scientific opinion, and I have no preconceived plans to make changes on that medication.
Well, I wish you were hedging a little bit less today. Thank you.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I understand that the senator from Alabama has an engagement that she needs to get off to, so I'm going to defer my time to her.
Florida or
and we'll
Alabama?
claim it afterwards.
Florida, go Gators. But Katie Britt would want me to say roll tide.
It'll lose you votes in Florida, but anyway, go ahead.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. I'm so grateful. Thank you. I'm very grateful as the rookie to be able to question before these senior senators. It's a big deal. So I'm grateful to all of you. Thank you so much. I'm so honored. I am so excited to see you here today. I was incredibly happy with this nomination when confirmed. I know you're going to do a great job. I have two issues I want to cover, and they are relevant specifically to the two main roles in my life over the last 6 years, one as a mother and one as Attorney General of Florida. First, I want to talk to you about what is going on with the FDA and it's burying its head in the sand about illegal chemically ridden, extraordinarily high amounts of nicotine, Chinese vapes that are flooding the United States market. In fact, 2/3 of the export market from China for these vapes, 2/3 of our market here are Chinese vapes coming out of China. So it's unbelievable. They are in flavors like strawberry blow pop, watermelon, sour berry, attracting children, addicting children. We have so many, thousands and thousands and thousands of pending applications. Most of these things are illegal in the United States right now, but yet somehow China has decided to flood our market with illegal vapes, with the United States market of illegal vapes, and they're benefiting. In fact, in China, they banned flavored vapes. And so all of the manufacturers there of these chemically ridden vapes have now flooded our market and now are addicting our children, much like we're seeing this in many other ways in harmful substance coming from China, and they're not doing much about it, fentanyl, et cetera. So whoever comes in as the head of FDA, this is one of your problems you have to address immediately. I know there are a lot of things that you're going to get questioned about, but these things are all over the United States in convenience stores. They're readily available to children. If you walked in any one right now, you would be able to find them. And not only are the amounts of nicotine going up and up and up and up, we don't know what is in these things. And there has been little to nothing done to deal with our pending applications at the FDA or to enforce those that we know are illegal right now. How would you address this, and what do you plan to do on day one?
Well, thank you, Senator. I appreciate your passion on this important issue, and I've appreciated your work as Attorney General in Florida on this issue. Maybe it's because you both believe in doing the right thing and because you're a baseball mom that you're interested in this.
I first heard about this on the bleachers at a baseball game.
I think there are 4 new vaping stores that have popped up in my neighborhood all in the last few years. I've not walked into one of them, although perhaps I should to check it out. But you are absolutely right that we are being flooded with Chinese products. We have no idea what's in these products. And public health is not even going to be able to study them because it takes so long for public health research to catch up. But it's very concerning, and it's not right that products are banned in China, and yet they're manufacturing them and sending them into the United States. So there are a few things the FDA can do to try to address this problem. First of all, the Office of Inspections and Investigations has a lot of people with guns, and they do enforcement and raids. And we need, in collaboration with DOJ and other areas of law enforcement, to try to address this problem of illegal products on our market.
There was an announcement during the last administration, and I won't get into much of it. They were going to, once people finally convinced them that this is out of control and people are getting addicted by the day, there was this big announcement about task force. We're going to use all the tools available. That's great, and enforcement needs to be key. Florida had to finally step up and do it ourselves because the federal government would do nothing. But the first key has to be, what do we do with our pending applications? Yes. How do you clean up FDA's house first? You need to know what the law is before you can enforce it. Let's start there. Please focus on that, and then we'll also work with the enforcement measure. And I'd also like to just get a commitment from you, as from the state of Florida, citrus growers, orange growers, that's a big deal to us. There's a regulation in there, an arbitrary regulation amount of sugar content. it needs to be examined with disease and greening and all the things facing the citrus industry. That arbitrary regulation, the oranges aren't producing as much sugar, I can go into it, but will I have your commitment for them to look at that regulation, things that are set sometimes we need to revisit on how it's affecting industries across the United States? Will I have your commitment to look at that?
Senator, I had my cold-pressed, freshly squeezed orange juice this morning, and you do have my commitment to look at that.
Oh, our orange growers are going to be so happy to hear that. I will tell them. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was a great murder board that told you to drink the orange juice. You know what I'm saying? That was really good. Senator Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. Doctor, thanks for coming on out. I was looking through your opening statement. At the very end, you talked about FDA being the gold standard, and you said gold standard of transparency, and I was glad to hear that. I wanted to ask you, in terms of transparency, do you think it's important that we can ensure that there's public comments on actions of agencies and departments, overseeing important aspects of our lives?
Senator, first of all, it was good to meet with you, and I enjoyed our conversation. I do believe in civil discourse and have been an advocate for civil discourse coming out of an era of medical establishment censorship. So I do believe in the principle. Now, there are laws and regulations around public comment periods, and so in some situations, a public comment period is required by a regulation.
I would just suggest here that, this is really important. As you know, the public very concerned. You were talking about, we had a long conversation about how to restore trust. And I think a big part of that is about involving the public more. I think you saw some of that in terms of the questions regarding VRBPAC and just the need for that type of radical transparency, as Secretary Kennedy talks about. Recently, there was an effort addressing the Richardson waiver. I asked that you look into this if you're confirmed. But I do think it's important that we maintain public comment, something that so far this HHS has not abided by and something that has been longstanding practice. Another aspect of this is about transparency and accountability. So I guess I just wanted to ask you, if we have this sense of nothing to hide, we want to root out waste, fraud, corruption, do you support the roles of inspector generals?
Senator, I believe in the law, and I believe in the process of having inspector generals.
Okay. Well, if you are confirmed, I just urge you to do everything you can to ensure that HHS has an inspector general, has an ability for us to be able to oversee the accountability and to be able to root out some of the problems that I hope both of us can agree upon. So I just want to ask for your commitment on that front, that you would push to try to have an inspector general there at HHS.
Thank you, Senator.
When it comes to ethics, I heard you refer about, just concerns you want to have ethics review in terms of positions that people might be having, especially involving approval of drugs, other things. I guess I want to just ask you a little bit more on your end. It looked like I come across something that's saying that you were willing to divest from your own investments that were being perceived potentially as a conflict of interest if you are confirmed in this job. Is that correct?
Senator, as you are aware, the Office of Government Ethics does a comprehensive review of basically everything I own, every stock, every equity, every share. I would describe it as a colonoscopy with a small bowel follow-through. It took about 4 weeks, and they gave me the option of resigning from some things or maintaining a role, and I chose voluntarily to divest and resign from everything.
And I applaud that, and I think that that should be the standard, especially for such important jobs. I guess I just wanted to ask you a little bit further here. Would you agree to recuse yourself from matters involving your former clients and employers if that comes before you at the FDA?
Senator, what I can promise you and commit to is to abide by all the guidance of the Office of Government Ethics.
I understand that, but you just talked about how you voluntarily took steps to be able to divest. That was not something you were required to do, though I do think you should have been. But I guess I would just ask you again, would you consider recusing yourself? Because, look, again, if you're making decisions about a previous client of yours, you can see how the general public would react to that in terms of concern about whether or not, you are doing this for the best interest of the people or the best interest of people you know.
Senator, I have signed to agree to recusals as defined by the Office of Government Ethics in any area where they perceived a conflict could occur. And so I have already agreed to the recusals required by the Office of Government Ethics.
One last thing I just wanted to raise, and this is just something I guess I just want to ask: what is your feeling about these potential Medicaid cuts that are being reviewed right now in Congress?
Senator, as you know, the FDA is not involved in Medicaid or coverage decisions.
I understand that. I guess the reason I raise it is that in your opening remarks, you said, I thought it was really powerful. You said that your motto in life has been about treating everyone in the community equally, especially the most vulnerable amongst them. So I just urge you to just continue to press. You will have a seat at the table if you're confirmed on healthcare decisions across the administration. And Medicaid is essential for the most vulnerable amongst us, and treating everyone equally. Your drugs, it's not just about the approval. You'd want to see that get into the hands of Americans, make sure that they can use and benefit from them. So I do think that you have an interest in preserving Medicaid.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, welcome. It was a good conversation that we had. I appreciated that. I thank you for the encouragement to read that provision in your book. So airplane reading for me.
Thank you, Senator.
I also want to thank you for the assurance that you gave to Senator Collins regarding the Vaccine Advisory Committee and ensuring that there would be meetings going forward. I think for several of us who had, I thought, good substantive conversations with Secretary Kennedy, we had received assurances about things like the vaccination committee. So making sure, again, that kind of very important input goes forward, I think, is important to many of us. So I appreciate that. I wanted to talk to you this morning about an issue that we discussed in my office, and that is with regards to ALS. The FDA's accelerated approval pathway has really been important and I think very promising for treatments for ALS and some other rare diseases. You have advocated for using common sense alongside science in regulatory decisions. So very briefly, how do we define common sense here as it applies to the regulatory decisions of FDA? How do we make sure that ALS patients who, again, are looking at a very, very, very limited time frame, they can't wait for the traditional approval process. There are some emerging measures using digital technologies. Is this in your realm of common sense? Give me a little bit of your view here on how you would like to proceed on these accelerating approval pathways.
Thank you, Senator, and I very much enjoyed our time together and talking through a bunch of these issues. We have to customize the regulatory process to the condition that we're trying to be able to offer hope for. So if a condition affects 19 people in the world as a partial triplication chromosome 15 disorder does, or a disease that affects 52 kids in the world, we cannot require 2 randomized controlled trials. We have to customize the regulatory process to what we're trying to do if our goal is to try to provide safe and effective therapies. So I do believe firmly in that approach, and I think we can use some common sense to ask some big questions we've never asked before at the FDA. Why does it take 10 years for a drug to get approved? Why does a college student who suffers from chronic abdominal pain for years and we have no idea what's going on, they go to Italy for a summer and they're suddenly cured of their abdominal pain? Why does a peanut allergy medication that's been safe with data for decades get approved in Europe before the United States when nearly 10% of our population has a food allergy? So I do think there's a lot of areas where we can ask, does a drug need to be prescription when it could be over the counter? Why are we requiring continuous glucose monitors to have a doctor's prescription when it's good for people to use these monitors and learn about what they're eating? We don't just want to limit continuous glucose monitoring to people with diabetes. We want to prevent diabetes when 30% of our nation's children has diabetes or prediabetes or some form of early insulin resistance. Why are we holding these tools to help people, empower them with knowledge about their health until after they're sick. Same with continuous blood pressure monitoring.
Well, and it's, as you point out, why do we wait? Now, we want to make sure that that there's a level of safety. That's the job there through the FDA. But again, being able to accelerate these in ways that are meaningful and to your point, that actually fit with the population that you're speaking to. So know that I'm going to be pushing you on this, as well as many other advocates out there. I want to quickly ask you about food safety inspections. State, local governments conduct about 60% of food processing facility inspections, 90% of produce safety inspections, 100% of retail food inspections. What has happened is we have seen in the Biden administration FDA planning to cut funding for state and local food safety programs. This impacts us in the state of Alaska when it comes to our seafood industry and in other areas. So I'm looking for a commitment from you that under the Trump administration, the FDA is going to maintain funding for these contracts with state and local governments. They've proven that it's more cost-effective, more efficient, and it also is what Congress has asked for. So I'd like to know that you're going to be supportive in that regard with regards to state and local food.
I'm happy to look at that with you, Senator.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much, Dr. Makary, for taking time to meet with me. I've found that most parents would do anything to keep their children safe and healthy, which is why we probably see so much intense debate on the best ways to protect our children. And the FDA has historically been seen as the authority on reliable information about public health issues related to medical products, food, tobacco, cosmetics, dietary supplements. However, people are getting their information in many different ways now, in many different places. And we're faced with a growing challenge of opinions replacing scientific consensus and the proliferation of misinformation and disinformation. Parents need accurate, science-based information to help make informed decisions for their children. How would you use your position as FDA commissioner to compete with uninformed voices and to share evidence-based, consensus-driven information that is free from political influence?
Well, thank you, Senator, and I enjoyed our time meeting together. I believe very much in empowering people with good information. That's why I've written 3 best-selling books to try to educate people about health. And I do think you can explain to people with humility what we know and what we don't know, and then they're going to trust us more. Trust in doctors and hospitals is at a crisis right now. It was 71% in 2019. 71% of the public trusted us in 2019. Now it's down to 40%. That's a 31-point drop in my profession. That is a major problem. If we have the cure for pancreatic cancer, but only 40% of the public is going to come in and take it because the rest doesn't trust us, then that medication is only 40% effective. So I think we fight bad ideas with more ideas. I do not believe in censorship of scientific opinions. I think we need a civil discourse. Unfortunately, we have a sort of toxic discourse right now in the United States and the politicalization of immune cells in some cases.
One of my big concerns is that who those voices are and that they really be robust, scientifically trusted messengers as well. One of the other big issues that we're facing are drug shortages that have reached an all-time high, threatening access to products that we use every day, from IV bags to life-saving drugs for cancer. It's particularly concerning for children's hospitals because of pediatric drugs and supplies that must be formulated to accommodate children's unique needs. Do you agree, and this is kind of a yes or no, this is a yes or no. Do you agree that the FDA should play a leading role in mitigating drug shortages?
I love yes and no questions.
Good. Can you do it?
A leading role. They should take a role. I think the problem is much bigger than the FDA.
So yes or no, you're like not sure if it's a yes or no.
I would refer you to my article in JAMA on this topic.
And I want to shift to clinical trials as well. You agreed, we talked about the importance of clinical trial diversity, but I want an assurance that you will stand up to any Trump administration actions that conflict with this. So again, yes or no, do you believe clinical trial diversity is critically important? That's an easy one.
Well, if you're talking about a trial of
This
sickle
is-
cell disease,
this is an easy
are
one.
we saying that we need to have white people in a trial of sickle cell
Do you
disease?
think-
I believe in common sense, and I believe in clinical trial diversity both. And so I believe if you're going to make results extrapolated to the general population, you should have results in those populations that you're making recommendations for.
That one was an easy one. Do you think it is acceptable for the administration to remove congressionally mandated guidance document on clinical trial diversity?
I'm not familiar with that.
Should you be confirmed, will you reinstate and finalize this document after you look at it as one of your first actions? Would you take a look at that? Could you commit to looking at that?
Yes, Senator.
Good answer. Will you restore the website for the Office of Minority Health and Health Equity?
I'm not familiar with that website, Senator.
If there was one, and you knew there was one, would you restore the website that would provide information to the American people?
I think you're asking me to make a decision on information that I don't have, so you have my commitment to take a look at.
If you got the opportunity to review the website and then know that it would help to spread real information, science-based information, would you reinstate that website?
I would be happy to review it.
I have more questions that I will send as for the record, but particularly I'm concerned also about the Vaccines for Children program and making sure with you've heard our colleagues talk about the cancellation of the meeting. This is not just about cost for families, which is huge right now, but it's also about coverage. And so I yield back my time, and I thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Senator. Doctor, it's great to see you again. I enjoyed our conversation.
Good to see you.
Congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
Thank you for your willingness to take on this very important role. You've been asked about this several times already, but I just want to drill down a little bit further. In 2000, President Clinton's FDA approved a chemical abortion regimen with the drugs mifepristone and also misoprostol. Now, the FDA concluded that mifepristone could not be safely used. I'm quoting the FDA there. Safely used, could not be, without special measures. It's the FDA's language. And in particular, the FDA mandated that prescribers needed to be licensed physicians who were able to diagnose and treat ectopic pregnancies to accurately determine the gestational age of the baby. And the FDA further required that these drugs be administered and dispensed in person, that there be a day 1 in-person administration of the drug, a day 3 in-person administration of the second wave of the drug, a day 14 check-in for complications. And the FDA further emphasized that given the potential risks of these drugs, physicians needed to be able to provide ongoing care. The FDA also said, and I'm quoting now, the percentage of women who considered any particular adverse event as severe ranged from 2 to 35%, end quote. And the FDA included what's called a black box warning, which you're very familiar with, which remains on the drug. Now, those restrictions were largely in place until just a couple of years ago, when the Biden administration, after the United States Supreme Court took up the Dobbs decision, granted cert on it, at that point, the Biden administration decided to eliminate 20 years of in-person dispensing requirements for this drug. They didn't cite any studies that they said were adequate. That the FDA acknowledged that the studies that they looked at did not take into account the new protocols that they were issuing. They just eliminated 2 decades of in-person dispensing requirements. My question to you is, given the FDA's own findings on this drug over 2 decades, doesn't it make sense that the FDA return to the pre-political, before the political intervention of the Biden administration, the pre-political protocol that requires in-person dispensing for chemical abortion drugs?
Senator, I appreciated our conversation prior to this hearing. I do think it makes sense to review the totality of data and ongoing data. I know personally of OB doctors who prefer to insist even though they have the option to prescribe otherwise, but they choose to insist that mifepristone be taken when necessary in their office as they observe the person taking it. And I think their concern there is that if this drug is in the wrong hands, it could be used for coercion.
And of course, you're familiar with the fact that now it's not merely that there's no requirement that it be ingested in the presence of a physician. There's no in-person dispensing requirement whatsoever. This is what the Biden administration, 2 decades of in-person dispensing requirements, the Biden administration eliminated those. Now, you've said several times you'll review the data. You're aware that in 2016, the Obama FDA eliminated the requirement that physicians report adverse events with regard to mifepristone, aren't you?
I believe they limited the data required to fatalities but not adverse events.
Will you put back in place the full reporting requirements so that you can have a full range of data to evaluate?
Senator, I'm happy to look at that. I do believe in data, and I don't believe in prejudging data before somebody has taken a look at data, including future data.
Well, let me just say that here's the deal. The FDA's rules were pretty consistent and pretty stable for 20-plus years until suddenly the Dobbs decision appeared on the horizon. And when that happened, all of a sudden, we got massive changes in the dispensing requirements of this drug. And I'll just point out that over 60% of abortions in the United States are now carried out with chemical drugs, with these drugs. They're not done in clinics, they're not done in hospitals. They're done with these drugs without any kind of physician supervision, without any physicians there if there's a serious adverse event. And I'll also just point out that if the Biden rules are allowed to stand, it doesn't matter what voters in the states, it doesn't matter what, this is a serious and very difficult moral issue, the case of life and abortion. And it won't matter what voters in the states say, because the Biden rules say now that bureaucrats can mail in abortion drugs to every single state, no in-person dispensing required. It doesn't matter what voters in the state have decided on the issue. It doesn't matter whatsoever. Now, if that's allowed to stand, we may as well just go back to having the Supreme Court make all the decisions, because right now Washington bureaucrats are making all the decisions. Doctors are not involved. They're not in-person dispensing. State voters are not involved. And I just want to register this is extremely concerning to me. It ought to be concerning to everyone who's concerned about women's safety, and also about what I thought was the position of this administration, which is that it ought to be voters in the states and the relevant to localities that are deciding this decision. So I know you're familiar with this, Doctor.
Thank you.
I appreciate your commitment to the data. I hope that you'll look at the full range of data, and I hope we can count on you to protect women's health and the health of the unborn.
Thank you, Senator.
Well, Senator Kaine, let the record reflect. Even though I have the gavel, I'm going to stop right now and turn it over to you. You're recognized, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Hawley and I share a unique perspective. There are 2 sets of senators who went to the same high school. Chuck Schumer and Bernie Sanders went to James Madison High School in Brooklyn, New York, and Josh and I went to Rockhurst High School in Kansas City.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Just wanted to put that on the record. Dr. Makary, I loved the opportunity to visit with you, and I know the answer to this question, but I just want to stress it again. You didn't have anything to do with the layoff of the 1,000 FDA employees that have been laid off in the last couple of weeks, correct?
That's correct, Senator.
And do you know anything about the layoffs? For example, who made the decisions or what groups of people were laid off?
I do not, Senator.
You indicated that when you come into the office, you're going to do an assessment. And I suppose, based on your experience, that if you look at this going forward, you think personnel policy, including layoffs, should be done strategically rather than just kind of willy-nilly across the board randomly, correct?
I am open to ideas on making government more efficient.
Do you think willy-nilly random across the board is a good idea or not a good idea?
Look, I'm a surgeon, so, you know, I'm going to give you a surgical answer.
Yeah, okay. That's good. It is a little bit puzzling. The administration has high confidence in you. You've got this hearing right now. They expect you to be confirmed. Probably will be based on practice. So the notion that they would lay off 1,000 people before you got there is a little bit unusual. And what we're seeing in agencies and the layoffs is that it is willy-nilly random. Probationers get laid off because they can't fight back. Probationers are disproportionately veterans. I'm glad you will be a surgeon and act like a surgeon should you be confirmed. Second thing I want to ask is about user fees, and we chatted a little bit about this in the office.
We agreed that despite the need for reforms at the FDA, that the FDA is sort of the gold standard. I asked you, is there another nation that does this better than us? And you said, no, there wasn't, even though, again, you've got reforms you'd like to make. Here is an issue that's pretty technical, but it's an important one. We talked about tracking adverse events after a drug or medical device is approved. And you indicated that the FDA can do a better job of identifying issues with problems that are already on the market. It's not all about approval, and then it's about post-approval tracking. There are many different user fee programs that outline the relationship between the FDA and industry. And for most of the user fee programs, except medical device user fee, FDA can use the collected user fee dollars to conduct post-marketing surveillance. But the medical device user fee program does not allow that use of the user fee dollars. Would you agree that the FDA should be able to use the user fees collected of medical devices to do post-approval surveillance? Senator, as you know, user fees are established by Congress, and I'm more than happy to be a part of the conversation about the best use of those dollars within the agencies. I very much enjoyed our conversation, and as you know, I'm committed to an FDA that delivers more cures for Americans and meaningful treatments, healthy food for children. But can I just ask about this? Do you think post-approval surveillance is something that's important? I am a big believer in the idea that we should not just turn a blind eye after the FDA approves something. Right. If we do that, we get burned with 1 million lives lost from oxycodone and OxyContin without any monitoring. That's my next topic. And I do agree with you that making that change would be on Congress's shoulders. But I do think it's odd that we don't allow the user fees to be used for post-approval surveillance on medical devices when we do in the other areas, and I'd love to work with you on that. On OxyContin, I want to just close with this one. We're seeing some improvements. 24% decline in drug overdose for the 12-month period ending in September 2024 compared to previous year. And just yesterday, the NIH released findings of an NIH-funded study researching a new pathway to address pain issues. But 87,000 Americans died overdosed in the 12-month period, so it's an improvement, but we got so much farther to go. 1 in 4 Virginians deal with chronic pain, and one of the issues you and I talked about is, can the FDA not just be in receive mode to get, you know, the applications for approvals and approved? Can the FDA even be proactive in looking and saying, how come we don't have more non-opioid-based pain management strategies? The FDA shouldn't be picking a winner among, you know, competitors, but to look at gaps and try to incentivize or encourage filling those gaps would be smart. Could you share some of your ideas for how we might encourage appropriately the development of innovative strategies to address chronic pain without using opioids? Thank you, Senator. I do believe the FDA should not just be in receive mode, but also partner with industry and facilitate the process and ensure that the scientific review is independent at the same time without cutting any corners on the independence of that review. The opioid pain problem can also be addressed by innovation, more localized treatments, and looking at post-approval monitoring of devices. Great. Thank you. I look forward to more discussion. Thank you, Senator. Thanks.
Coach Tuberville.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Doctor, for being here.
Thank you, Coach.
Willingness to do this. World War II, we had to find ways to feed our troops. We knew nothing about preservatives and canning foods, and ever since then, our food's gone downhill because we have put everything in the world in our food. Number one, to get kids addicted to it, which we have. We've lost probably a couple of generations because of the obesity and diabetes. I have faith in this generation. I have 2 kids in this generation coming up that they're looking at their health as a future, and they're fired up about, you know, nutrition being a good part of it. You familiar with GRAS? Generally recognized safe foods. You know, the chemicals that go into our foods. What's your thoughts on that? What's your thoughts on you as an FDA director having the ability to look in this and no, we're not using this chemical in this food? What's your thoughts?
Well, first of all, Senator, Coach, I think you have had a perspective on this and been an advocate for healthy foods, and perhaps it's because of your unique position where you've worked with young people for so long. Half of our nation's children are sick, and nobody has really been doing anything meaningful on this front until we have gotten new momentum and enthusiasm from Secretary Kennedy and President Trump to finally address the root causes of these diseases, general body inflammation and generalized insulin resistance. And food has a part of it. Food has a big part of it. When we eat foods with a lot of molecules that do not appear in nature, these are chemicals. These are chemicals that the industry insists are safe, a subset of which are concerning. There's a body of research now that suggests concern with some of these ingredients. We have to look at those ingredients, and you have my commitment to do so if confirmed as FDA commissioner. These chemicals are creating an inflammatory response in the gastrointestinal tract. And with an altered microbiome lining that GI tract, kids feel sick. It's not an acute inflammatory reaction. It's a chronic, low-grade reaction, and they don't feel well. And what are we doing? We are drugging our nation's children at scale. At scale. We have to reassess what we're doing because we're not on a good path right now.
Yeah, I grew up in the South. I love fried foods, okay? We fry everything, including Snicker bars and Twinkies. But let me ask you this. I hear a lot about seed oils and the good and the bad. Your thoughts?
So I think seed oils are a good example of where we could benefit from a consolidation of the scientific research. And I don't think it's any one ingredient in the food supply that's making our nation's children sick with a 30% rate of insulin resistance and diabetes in American teenagers today. That is a massive signal in the data. And so I think we have to look at the totality of every single thing in school lunch programs, in the diet of our nation's children. When we're using tax dollars to make purchases of foods that we know make our nation's children sick, we have to re-examine how we're spending those tax dollars. So one thing I would like to work on is a school lunch program for some school districts on a pilot basis to transition to healthier foods. A lot of school districts want to, but they don't know how, and they may not have the funds. So I've been discussing this with Jay Bhattacharya and others in the administration, and I hope that's something we can do.
Thank you. Just a few months ago, we had the former FDA director, and I asked him about red dye number 3, and it was a pretty interesting conversation. Red dye number 3, we've done studies on it, and we won't allow it in cosmetics, okay, because it causes cancer, but we are allowed to put it in our food. And a little bit confused. I'm a football coach, but I'm not that stupid, you know. Put it on your face and put it in your stomach, there's no difference. But he made an interesting statement that we're 20 years behind Europe because Europe doesn't allow it in anything. We're 20 years behind Europe on looking into red dye 3 and all the other dyes. What's your thoughts on dyes in this country?
I agree with you that it did not make sense that red dye number 3 was banned in cosmetics but allowed in the food supply. And so, as you know, with 2 business days left in the Biden administration, there was an announcement to ban red dye number 3 in 2027 or 2028.
And why that long? We want to kill people for 2 more years? I mean, I would hope that you would, if you're confirmed, you go in and look at it very quickly and say, why do we want to put our people in harm's way? Thank you.
Thank you, Coach.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Makary, for your service. I finally got a chance to look over some of your 3 books, or probably more than that, but the 3 books that I was able to chase down, and each one seemed provocative and full of answers. I will say, as a very, very slow reader, I'm a dyslexic, I do wish you had something like Cliff Notes so that we could just get 10 or 15 pages concise and get the essence out of that.
I'd be happy to personally summarize them for you, Senator.
I think we have witnesses that just heard that. I'm very excited. I appreciate your courage in taking on a lot of these traditional approaches and being so candid. Let me go through a couple questions. In just a few weeks, roughly 10% of the FDA staff has been laid off, and most of these layoffs were inspectors who looked either at food supply, whether it was safety of medical devices, and yet for the past several years, job vacancies, if you measure them as an indication of anything, but for FDA inspectors, job vacancies have been going up, not down. In other words, we have more unfilled spots, and now all of a sudden we've laid off 10% of the people there. That chaos and the understaffing is going to really present a serious morale issue, which I'm sure you're aware of. I don't know if you have any plans for that, and how are you going to be able to try and do the best you can to ensure the FDA's gold standard of science if we can't get enough inspectors?
Senator, thank you for the question, and I enjoyed our time together in your office. I was not involved in any personnel decisions.
That was not a criticism. I was just saying, once you get in the job, if your budget is suddenly diminished and you've got 10% fewer inspectors and you already didn't have enough by the existing measures, I'm not sure there's an answer for it. Maybe it's an unfair question.
Senator, if confirmed, you have my commitment that I will do an assessment within the agency of personnel, and it will be an ongoing assessment to ensure that the scientists and food inspectors have all the resources they need to do their job.
Great. Again, that's certainly the exact place to start. We have a bill, Skinny Labels, Big Savings Act, that helps more generic drugs, more of that competition come into the market, lower drug costs. Again, with so many of the FDA workers having been fired and laid off, will there be sufficient people at the agency to review generic drug applications? Because that often gets pushed to the bottom of the heap, and yet it has dramatic savings, especially for elderly and people on the lower parts of the people who don't have insurance. So is that FDA, are you worried about a slowdown, again, due to resources and personnel?
Senator, I want to make sure that the reviewers and the review process is done properly without cutting any corners on the scientific independence and done expeditiously. So you do have my commitment that I will do my best to ensure that that's done as best as possible. Just to put things in context, if I may, the FDA has almost 19,000 employees, just over 18,000. That represents a 100% increase since 2007. Now, I understand there were some layoffs recently. I understand some or many were hired back. But I just wanted to let you know that to put things in context, we have seen a doubling of the agency in terms of number of employees since 2007.
I accept that and was aware of that, but it's a fair point. A lot of talk about measles. Secretary Kennedy recommended the use of cod liver oil as one of several things that people could do, and left it to parentals' discretion as to whether they would get their kids vaccinated, which I think I agree with that. I think the parents in the end have a right and a responsibility to make that decision for their kids. But it seemed to me that there could be a stronger, those of us who looked at depth and in detail at the facts, that this is really a very safe vaccination for 99.99% of kids. And it saves lives and it prevents huge levels of very sick kids. You think there should be more, or will you be willing to be a more enthusiastic supporter of vaccinations, while at the same time recognizing that parents get the final say?
Senator, vaccines save lives, and I do believe that any child who dies of a vaccine-preventable illness is a tragedy in the modern era. The rare times in which a child dies of measles, it is often in the setting of a comorbid condition or severe malnutrition, and perhaps that is the rationale scientifically and physiologically as to why some supplementation in terms of nutrients may provide a benefit to children who are very sick and hospitalized with measles.
Right, and I don't deny that.
Thank you.
But I'm getting gavelled.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you so much for your service.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah, Senator Husted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great to have you before the committee. I enjoyed, Dr. Makary, the conversation we had in my office, and I want to just give you a chance to share some thoughts, kind of building on what I'm sure others have asked you. I am deeply concerned about how much inflationary cost the healthcare system has created for the American public over the last decade. And in the 21st century, we talk about inflation around here. The most inflationary cost affecting consumers, businesses, the American public, the American taxpayers' healthcare costs. We seem to spend more, get worse outcomes. You look at the fact that from the earliest stages, we have children who are unhealthier, worse diets, more obesity, which lead to problems like diabetes, lower quality of life, lower productivity as they go through life, higher costs in the healthcare system. That continues to manifest through life on all those fronts, and then the government and the taxpayers end up paying for all of it through Medicare and Medicaid. It is driving. It is driving us into bankruptcy in some levels and costing people and families the ability to afford to live. And so there are lots of ingredients to that. How do we take cost out of the healthcare system, whether it is making people healthier and making this whole system sustainable for the long run?
Well, thank you, Senator Husted, and it's good to see the Cavaliers doing great this year. I hope this is their year to win it all.
No.
And I enjoyed our time in your office.
We only have one championship in Cleveland. That was when LeBron was there. So.
First of all, you are 100% correct, and this is something I'm very passionate about. Healthcare costs are spiraling out of control, and it's burdening everyday American businesses and families. It's getting more and more difficult to compete with businesses overseas because of healthcare costs. It outpaces inflation. And when we are spending money that we don't have as a country, it drives inflation, and inflation is a backhanded dirty tax on the poor. It doesn't affect the wealthy, it affects the poor. And that's why we've got to address healthcare spending. We've heard of many different ideas out there, but the main root issue is the health of the population, and it is getting worse. 75% of adults have some comorbid condition, or diabetes, or prediabetes, or are overweight or obese. 3 in 10 teens now have insulin resistance. That's not good for our future as a country. So thanks to President Trump and Secretary Kennedy, for the first time, we're talking about root causes, both on a research basis and in terms of what we can do at every agency. And within the FDA, I do think there are things we can do to help empower people by facilitating this independent scientific review of devices and other ways to prevent chronic diseases with continuous glucose monitoring, continuous blood pressure monitoring, and healthy foods for children. If confirmed, my goals are very clear at the FDA. More cures and meaningful treatments for Americans, including diagnostics, healthy food for children, and rebuilding the public trust.
Great. I look forward to working with you on all those issues, as I'm sure many of the members of this committee do. One way that we can drive more efficiency and speed to market for things that can improve lives and hopefully lower costs is through technology. I know that I was involved with the Cleveland Clinic when they got the first quantum computer focused on healthcare research, and you use things like quantum and AI to drive discoveries, speed to market with these. Could you talk about how the FDA, under your leadership, would think about those things?
Thank you, Senator. I think there's a number of opportunities with AI right now that we have that we've never had before. We have an incredible opportunity to use AI to help reviewers in the review process, not to replace the human reviews, but to aid them and assist them in the same way that EKGs are read by AI devices that tell us normal sinus rhythm at the bottom of the EKG. Now, we still look at the rhythm, but it aids and it may help the efficiency among the reviewers. We can use AI also in drug design and drug development. Now, that's not something the FDA does, but the FDA can help provide data to help train machine learning models, to help design AI systems that can predict toxicities, adverse events, and even cures for some conditions. And finally, AI can be used to aid with data monitoring in a post-approval setting, so we don't learn 5 years after Vioxx is approved that 38,000 Americans died from it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Husted, and now Senator Markey.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm from Boston, the home of the world champion Boston Celtics. Good luck to the Cavaliers. But we'll have a little bet in June. You stated that you want to ensure that the FDA holds the gold standard of trusted science and transparency. In order for that to happen, the FDA commissioner must also uphold the gold standard for trusted science and transparency. In your financial disclosures, you disclosed that you made over $500,000 from Global Appropriateness Measures, LLC. The client list for that company includes companies that are interested in making money off of the healthcare system, insurance companies, hospital chains, private equity-backed companies. So can you tell the committee how much you made from those private equity and venture capital-backed companies?
Senator, first of all, thank you for the question, and I enjoyed our conversation prior to this hearing. I am very proud of my work at Global Appropriateness Measures. The purpose of the endeavor was to lower healthcare costs for Americans by reducing unnecessary surgery and medications.
No, and I appreciate that. Just for the record, can you just tell us how much you made from, the private equity and venture capital-backed companies?
So I have been a shareholder in Global Appropriateness Measures. I am fully divesting. I don't have the exact numbers at my fingertips, but they were all disclosed to the Office of Government Ethics, and they are all part of the disclosure system.
So was it in the millions of dollars or less?
Over the period of over the course of what period of time?
Over the period of time you had a relationship with them?
There was revenue of that company in the millions of dollars, yes. And I am one of the shareholders of that company. And I am very proud. The best way to lower drug prices in the United States are to stop taking drugs we don't need. So I do believe in the appropriateness of care, and that endeavor was designed to create software so we can monitor.
I appreciate that. We're just looking at the transparency issue. So I'm just trying to help you to be transparent here. So how much were you paid by insurance companies, including Devoted Health Services, an insurance company that primarily sells Medicare Advantage plans?
Yeah, that figure is in the Office of Government Ethics report. I don't have that exact number at my fingertips, and of course—
Was that in the millions of dollars as well?
No, that was far less, and that, again, I am a shareholder, so I did not, I'm one of the shareholders of that company.
Well, I think the American people do deserve your full transparency about how you might be influenced by the healthcare industry, insurance companies, private equity, and venture capital funds, and that's what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah, all of those reports will be public, Senator.
They will be public. They're not public at this point, so I'm not in a position to ask you about them, and that's why I'm asking you if you would—
Office of Government Ethics releases it at a certain point in time.
But it's not helpful because that may impact how much insurance companies pay or what they cover, the same insurance companies that do overcharge Americans and undercover their care. It will impact hospital costs and private equity. And you're coming into this role with relationships pre-existing that have a profit interest in the decisions that you will be responsible for making. That's why I'm raising these issues. Will you commit today to not participating in any decisions that would have an impact on known clients of global appropriateness measures during your tenure as FDA commissioner?
First of all, Senator, I appreciate your enthusiasm on this topic. I am one of the biggest advocates that was involved in the health insurance industry transparency of the secret negotiated rates. So I'm with you. The recusals that I will be taking are 100% in line with the Office of Government Ethics recommendations, which were not to resign from everything, but I chose to resign from everything to ensure no appearance of a conflict of interest.
That's important for us to hear. And the same thing, will you commit today to not participating in any decisions that would have an impact on private equity and venture capital investors of those clients as well?
Senator, I commit to following the Office of Government Ethics agreement.
Well, again, it's just so important for us to understand this going forward because of obviously the increasing role that those sectors are now playing, and they will be attempting to influence FDA decisions. So that's the reason why I'm raising the questions, and total transparency is absolutely necessary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that note, Doctor, you've been very transparent, right?
I believe so.
I mean, talk about that process. I mean, how transparent you have to be to get to this point today.
Well, there was a massive disclosure of basically every single share of everything that I own, and that process took a number of weeks, and I would describe it as a colonoscopy with a small bowel follow-through. And everything is out there, and basically I will have essentially no privacy when the Office of Government Ethics chooses to release that form. But that's okay. I'm proud of everything that I've done, and I'm more than happy to acknowledge that I've agreed to divest or resign from everything. And so I, again, was given the option not to resign from everything, and I chose to resign from everything because I want to ensure independence. This is not a job I'm taking to audition for my next job. This is a job I'm doing to serve the American public. I believe in more cures and meaningful treatments, healthy food for children, and rebuilding the public trust. So, Senator, I can commit to you that I am absolutely dedicated to that mission, and I am not there to audition for a future job.
Yeah, I appreciate that because this is so important. I mean, you've been nominated for this position because you're incredibly accomplished. Your background perfectly fits the role that you're about to take, and you bring experiences and success to the table to be the new head of the FDA and change it. Because you've talked about this. You mentioned in your testimony that healthcare has become too fragmented, too cold, and too corporate, right? I mean, and you're going to go there to shake that up and change that. The Make America Healthy Again movement that was a big part of giving this president a giant mandate with Secretary Kennedy and others who are coming to the table, the role that you're going to play is really important to that, to disrupt it. And I think we all agree that, I think the American people agree that the medical establishment, often condescending toward the American people, is something that we have to disrupt and change. Can you talk about how you're going to do that at the FDA?
Thank you, Senator. And I do agree 100% that for the first time ever, President Trump and Secretary Kennedy had moms that were Republican, Democrat, Independent come out and vote because they care deeply about the health of our nation's children. They want to see healthier food for children. They want to see an industry that has, they want to see an FDA that is independent of corporate influence, but at the same time working with partnerships around the country to facilitate not just be in a receive-only mode. So one of my goals is to ensure that the FDA maintains its scientific integrity and that we can do what we can to contribute to the Make America Healthy Again spirit.
Very good. Clinical and non-clinical testing are both very important parts of FDA's drug approval process. How do we modernize that process, modernize testing?
Well, first of all, there are steps in the regulatory process where we can take a look and ask, do we need to use the same processes that we've been using? Infant formula, for example, has had the same recipe for the last 40 years. And so with the exception of selenium, which was added in 2015, for 40 years we're requiring infant formula companies to use a standard recipe that was developed back when the food pyramid was misleading Americans and basically government misinformation. Can we take another look at that? Can we create other ways in which new products can be brought to market safely? Can we look at real-world data from European products? The more competition, the more resiliency in the supply chain and the lower the risk of a shortage in the future. So does an infant formula need to go through the same process as a new drug, or can we look at real-world data and work with the companies to figure out a smarter way that uses both trusted science and common sense, which is a theme I would like if confirmed.
I want to work with you on that. The FDA is starting to allow patients to choose whether they want prescription drug instructions on paper or digitally. Seems like common sense. But medical device instructions are still required to be on paper. Would you support changing that requirement?
Senator, my understanding is that's a requirement set by Congress, and I would be more than happy to work with you and members of Congress to take a look at that.
You have an opinion on it?
I've heard arguments on both sides. One thing that people have raised is that on one hand, it may be a waste of paper. It's a lot of paper. On the other hand, seniors may not go to a website to look at the information. So I think there are arguments on both sides. I would welcome the opportunity to work with you on reforming.
Thank you. I yield back.
Senator Banks, thank you. Senator also Brooks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Dr. Makary.
Good morning.
Good to see you here. You know, I'm going to just feed off of something my colleague just mentioned, some words that I think are significant. He said the medical establishment is condescending to the American people, and I'd like to offer that, unfortunately, because this administration has been so reckless in the way that it has handled civil servants, I believe they've been very condescending to many of them as well, and they are, for the most part, many of them are my constituents who work in institutions like Johns Hopkins and who are serving the people. And many of the actions of this administration have been quite chaotic and confusing. So I want to just draw you to a few things. The committee staff raised last week a memo that was put out by OPM, and this memo directed agencies to dramatically reduce staff. And then they reversed themselves, and I'm not sure whether you've seen the latest guidance from OPM this week, which backtracked that directive to fire employees, instead said that they should they clarified by saying that decisions to fire should be left to individual agencies. And so I'd like to just ask you, given this updated guidance, whether we have your assurance here today at this hearing that you will not arbitrarily fire employees at FDA, given the new guidance.
First of all, Senator, good to see you, and I enjoyed our conversation, and I'm very proud to work at Johns Hopkins in the state of Maryland. And I'm a big believer in the professional career staff at the FDA, which is also located, by and large, most of the employees are in Maryland. And so you have my promise that if confirmed, I will do my own independent assessment on personnel. I welcome input on efficiencies at the agency. At the same time, I want to make sure that the scientists and food inspectors and staff central to the core mission of the agency have all the resources they need to do their job well.
Thank you. And as you mentioned, there are so many valuable members. FDA does a tremendous service for our country. They handle, for example, drug safety, as you know. When we think about reviewing medical devices, and you mentioned infant formula, where the men and women who are designated as the people who would make sure that those items are safe are the ones who've been terminated. So I would like to know whether you would commit then to rescinding the termination of scientists who were working, for example, to address the bird flu.
Senator, I was not involved in any of those personnel decisions, but if confirmed, I will certainly do an assessment.
Okay, you'll go back and look at those terminations.
Happy to, Senator.
Okay, thank you. As well as the termination of their individuals in FDA's food division, the people who keep our food safe. And so you would commit then to going back and looking at those terminations to make an independent assessment.
Of course, happy to.
Okay, and in the same vein, I wonder whether you realize that many of FDA's salaries, you may already know this, are paid in large not by taxpayers, but by user fees. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am, Senator.
And so the concept that the reason to terminate these employees is to save taxpayer dollars is one that's based on a premise that is largely not true, since we use the user fees for many of the salaries. And that being the case, I wonder whether you would commit then to rehiring their 100 employees who were fired from FDA's Tobacco Center, which is 100% funded by user fees. Will you commit to going back and looking to rehire the 100 who were terminated?
Senator, if an employee has not logged onto their VPN in 2 years, then I don't want to rehire that individual. But if there are people that deserve a look, of course, I'm happy to look at that.
Right, we're talking about, again, there's a big lie out there that says these civil servants are lazy, they are shiftless, they don't show up. That is by and large not true. So asking you if you would go back and look at the ones who have been summarily terminated without cause. And your answer to that has been yes, you will go back and make your own independent assessment.
I will do an assessment if confirmed, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, on Tuesday, DOJ made the GSA release a list of over 400 government buildings that they want to dispose of, and many of these are in White Oak campus, which is in Maryland. One of them is in a building called Building Number 1, and I wonder whether you're familiar with Building Number 1.
I'm not familiar with the numbering of the buildings, Senator.
Well,
I'm
that's where
sorry.
your office would be, and that's one of the buildings that that DOJ has put on the list to close, shutter, and close up. And so again, just pointing out that many of these decisions are arbitrary, that they harm the work that we do and harm the American people, and just wanted to ask you if you would be committed to making decisions that make sense and that do not eliminate the FDA.
I believe in common sense and trusted science, and if confirmed, you have my commitment to do an assessment of personnel, to look at efficiencies. I welcome the input of any organization, of any individual member of Congress, from the administration and the DOJ team as well, to figure out how the government can be more efficient.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Dr. Makary. I'd like to submit for the record a Washington Post article referenced by Help Committee witness and abortion survivor Melissa Oden regarding a woman who took mifepristone twice, including once obtaining it online and taking outside the FDA's 10-week indication window. She still delivered her baby. While FDA has conducted safety studies on the product, I'm not aware that they've studied any safety outcomes related to a child who might still be born. As a physician, sending women abortion pills without a complete evaluation of the gestation of her pregnancy or checking for an ectopic pregnancy is clearly a safety issue. And that's why I would urge Dr. Makary to return to the REMS policy in place during the first Trump administration, requiring an in-person visit. With that, this concludes our hearing, and I'll just say that I know your family is incredibly proud of you, and I just thank them for being here as well. Believe me, you're on for a ride. So thank you for volunteering along with the doctor. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions, questions for the record will be due tomorrow at 5 p.m. This concludes the hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.